The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle as Guardsman James Mitchell adjusted his red tunic one final time. At 24 years old, he had dreamed of this moment since childhood, standing guard at one of Britain's most historic royal residences. The weight of his bearskin hat felt familiar now after months of training, and the polished buttons on his uniform gleamed like mirrors in the early light. James had grown up in a small village outside Manchester, where his grandfather used to tell him stories about serving in the Queen's Guard during the 1960s. Those tales of honor, discipline, and unwavering duty had planted a seed in young James's mind that grew stronger with each passing year. After completing his basic military training with exceptional marks, he had applied for the prestigious position and endured rigorous selection processes that tested not just his physical abilities, but his mental fortitude as well. The training had been unlike anything he had ever experienced. Hours of standing perfectly still while instructors shouted, threw objects, and created distractions around him. Learning to ignore hunger, thirst, and even physical discomfort, while maintaining the stoic expression that had become synonymous with the Queen's Guard. His drill sergeant, a weathered veteran named Sergeant Major Thompson, had been particularly tough on him, perhaps sensing his deep desire to succeed. Now, as he took his position outside the castle's main entrance, James felt the weight of centuries of tradition settling on his shoulders. The Queen's Guard wasn't just a ceremonial role. These soldiers were highly trained members of the British Army's elite regiments, responsible for protecting the monarch and the royal palaces. Every guard understood that beneath the pageantry and tourist attractions lay a serious military duty. The morning started like any other. Tourists began gathering early, cameras ready to capture the famous guards in their iconic red uniforms and towering bearskin hats. James had learned to tune out the constant chatter and clicking of camera shutters, focusing instead on his breathing and maintaining perfect posture. His rifle, though ceremonial in appearance, was fully functional, and he had been trained to use it if necessary. By mid-morning, the crowd had grown considerably, school groups mixed with international tourists, all eager to get the perfect photograph. James noticed a group of young men in their 20s pushing through the crowd, speaking loudly and clearly under the influence of alcohol despite the early hour. Their behavior was already drawing disapproving looks from other visitors, but James maintained his focus straight ahead, as protocol demanded. The group approached his position, their voices growing louder and more boisterous. One of them, a tall man with messy brown hair and a Manchester United jersey, began making jokes about the guard's appearance. His friends laughed and encouraged him, emboldened by the alcohol and the apparent lack of response from the motionless soldier. "Look at this guy," the man slurred, gesturing toward James. "Standing there like a statue, bet he can't even move." The crowd around them began to shift uncomfortably, sensing that something inappropriate was about to happen. Parents pulled their children closer, while other tourists started recording with their phones, perhaps anticipating an interesting encounter. James could hear everything but remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the crowd. This wasn't his first encounter with disrespectful tourists. During training, they had been taught how to handle such situations, when to ignore, when to respond, and when to call for backup. The key was always to maintain the dignity of the uniform and the institution they represented. The situation escalated when the intoxicated man stepped closer, now just inches from James's face. "I bet you're not even a real soldier," he taunted, his breath reeking of alcohol. "Just some actor in a costume for the tourists." His friends laughed nervously, some beginning to realize that their companion was going too far. What happened next would become the subject of countless videos, news, reports, and discussions about respect, duty, and the remarkable restraint shown by Britain's finest soldiers. The tension in the air was thick as the intoxicated tourist continued his taunting. James Mitchell remained motionless, but his training had taught him to be acutely aware of his surroundings. He could sense the growing unease of the crowd, the way conversations had quieted, and how more phones were now pointing in his direction. The morning that had started so peacefully was about to take a dramatic turn. The man in the Manchester United jersey, emboldened by his friend's nervous laughter and the guard's apparent lack of response, decided to escalate further. "See? He's not even real," he announced to the crowd, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Watch this." Without warning, he reached out and gave James a hard push on the shoulder, causing him to sway slightly, but not break his stance. The crowd gasped. Collectively, children hiding behind their parents' legs peeked out with wide eyes. Several tourists stopped taking photos, sensing they were witnessing something that crossed a serious line. An elderly British gentleman in a tweed jacket shook his head disapprovingly and muttered something about no respect for tradition. James felt the push but responded exactly as his training dictated. His muscles tensed imperceptibly, his grip on his rifle remained steady, and his expression never changed. However, inside his mind, a complex calculation was taking place. He assessed the threat level, considered his options, and remembered the exact protocols he had memorized during countless hours of instruction. The drunk tourist, interpreting the lack of immediate response as weakness, became even bolder. "See? Told you he's fake." He laughed, turning to address the crowd like a performer. "Probably gets paid minimum wage to stand here and look pretty for pictures." His friends were no longer laughing. Even in their inebriated state, they could sense that something was wrong with the situation. What the tourist didn't understand was that Queen's Guards are trained soldiers from elite regiments like the Grenadier Guards, Coldstream Guards, and Welsh Guards. These aren't actors or ceremonial figures. They are combat-trained military personnel who have served in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. James himself had completed 2 tours of duty before being selected for this prestigious posting. The crowd began to murmur among themselves. A woman with an American accent whispered to her husband, "This doesn't feel right. Shouldn't someone stop this?" A group of Japanese tourists looked uncomfortable and began backing away from the scene. The atmosphere had shifted from curious entertainment to genuine concern. James continued his internal assessment. The individual appeared intoxicated but not immediately dangerous to others. However, he had made physical contact with a member of the Queen's Guard while on duty, which was a serious offense. The protocols were clear about what should happen next, but James also understood the importance of measured response. The tourist, now playing to his audience, decided to push his luck even further. "I bet I can make him move," he announced loudly. "These guys are all show." He stepped even closer to James, close enough that the guard could smell the alcohol on his breath and see the glazed look in his eyes. Meanwhile, other guards positioned around the castle had noticed the commotion. Through subtle hand signals invisible to the public, they had already communicated the situation to their superiors. The castle's security personnel were also aware and moving into position, though they remained out of sight to avoid creating more of a spectacle. James's training kicked into high gear. He remembered Sergeant Major Thompson's words during a particularly intense training session. "A Queen's Guard responds with precision, not emotion. Every action must be measured, appropriate, and maintain the dignity of the crown." The moment of truth was approaching, and James knew that whatever happened next would be captured on dozens of phones and potentially seen by millions around the world. The drunk man raised his hand again, this time aiming for another harder push. The crowd held its breath, sensing that they were about to witness something extraordinary. What they didn't expect was the lightning-fast, perfectly executed response that would make headlines across the globe and remind everyone why the Queen's Guard commands such respect and admiration. In the split second before the second push could land, James Mitchell's training took over completely. With movements so precise and swift they seemed almost supernatural, he executed a perfect military response that would be talked about for years to come. Without breaking his stoic facial expression, James stepped forward with his left foot, pivoted on his heel with military precision, and in one fluid motion, brought his rifle across his body in a defensive position, while simultaneously issuing the traditional warning that Queen's Guards are authorized to give. His voice, trained to carry across parade grounds, boomed across the courtyard with such authority that the entire crowd fell silent instantly. "Stand back from the Queen's Guard." The words echoed off the ancient stone walls of Windsor Castle. with such power and clarity that several people in the crowd actually took involuntary steps backward. James's voice carried not just volume, but centuries of military tradition and unwavering authority. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The intoxicated tourist, who had been reaching for another push, froze mid-motion with his hand still extended. His face went from cocky amusement to shock, then quickly to embarrassment as he realized that dozens of people were now staring at him with disapproval. The alcohol-induced bravado evaporated instantly, replaced by the dawning realization that he had seriously misjudged the situation. The crowd's reaction was equally swift. Those who had been filming gasped audibly, while others began applauding spontaneously. The elderly British gentleman in the tweed jacket nodded approvingly and muttered, "About time someone put him in his place." Parents who had been shielding their children now allowed them to watch, turning the moment into an impromptu lesson about respect and consequences. James's positioning was perfect, close enough to the tourist to demonstrate his authority, but not so close as to be threatening. His rifle remained in a defensive position, making it clear that he was prepared to escalate if necessary, but his stance communicated control rather than aggression. Every aspect of his response had been drilled into him during months of intensive training. The tourist's friends, sobered by the sudden shift in atmosphere, began pulling their companion away from the guard. "Come on, mate, let's go," one of them urged, grabbing the man's arm. "You've caused enough trouble." They could see that castle security personnel were now approaching from multiple directions, their presence becoming more obvious by the second. But James wasn't finished. Following protocol exactly, he took 2 precise steps forward, his boots clicking on the cobblestones with military precision. The sound seemed to amplify in the sudden silence, each step a statement of authority and discipline. He then executed a perfect about-face, turning 180 degrees with mechanical precision, and marched exactly 4 paces in the opposite direction, before resuming his original position. The entire sequence had taken less than 30 seconds, but every moment was captured on multiple phones and cameras. The demonstration of discipline, training and restraint was unlike anything most of the tourists had ever witnessed. This wasn't just a guard doing his job. This was a masterclass in military bearing and professional conduct under pressure. The drunk tourist, now fully aware that he had made a serious mistake, began backing away from the guard position. His face was flushed with embarrassment, and he kept looking around at the crowd, perhaps hoping to find some sympathy or support. Instead, he found only disapproving stares and the occasional shake of the head. One American tourist, who had been recording the entire incident, whispered to her companion, "Did you see how fast he moved? That was incredible." A British father explained to his young son, "That's what real discipline looks like. That guard showed more restraint and professionalism in 30 seconds than most people do in a lifetime." The castle's security team, dressed in plain clothes, had positioned themselves strategically around the area. While they didn't immediately approach the tourist, their presence was now unmistakably felt. One of them spoke quietly into a radio, coordinating with other personnel and ensuring that the situation remained under control. James returned to his position of attention, his expression once again neutral and focused on the horizon. But something had changed. The crowd's attitude toward him had shifted from curiosity to genuine respect and admiration. People began taking photos again, but this time with a different energy. They were capturing not just a tourist attraction, but a true professional who had demonstrated extraordinary restraint and skill. The morning sun continued to climb higher in the sky, casting new shadows across the courtyard, but the atmosphere around James's post had been permanently altered by those 30 seconds of perfect military response. Word of the incident spread through the crowd like wildfire. Tourists who had witnessed James Mitchell's remarkable response began sharing the videos on social media immediately. Within minutes, posts were appearing on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter with captions like, "Queen's Guard shows incredible discipline," and "This is why you don't mess with the British military." The drunk tourist and his friends had quickly disappeared into the crowd, clearly wanting to avoid any further confrontation or official consequences. But their departure didn't end the story. It was just the beginning of something much larger than anyone could have anticipated. A retired British Army colonel named Robert Hensworth, who had been visiting the castle with his granddaughter, approached the area where James stood at attention. Hensworth had served for 30 years and recognized exceptional military bearing when he saw it. He positioned himself where James could hear him clearly and spoke in a voice filled with genuine respect. "Outstanding discipline, guardsman," he said quietly, just loud enough for James to hear but not so loud as to create another spectacle. "Your regiment should be proud." Though James couldn't respond while on duty, the colonel's words meant more to him than any applause from tourists. Recognition from a fellow soldier, especially a senior officer, validated that his response had been not just appropriate, but exemplary. The incident had also caught the attention of the castle's senior security officer, Captain Sarah Williams, who had been monitoring the situation from the control room through security cameras. She made her way to James's position, arriving just as the crowd began to settle back into their normal tourist routine. Captain Williams was a no-nonsense former military police officer who had seen countless incidents during her time at various royal residences. She approached James and spoke in the calm, professional tone that all guards recognized as official business. "Guardsman Mitchell, well handled. Report to the guard room at the end of your watch for debrief." This was standard procedure after any incident, but James knew that Captain Williams's tone suggested approval rather than concern. The debrief would be an opportunity to review what happened, ensure proper protocols were followed, and document the incident for official records. It would also likely result in commendation for his textbook response under pressure. Meanwhile, the videos of the incident were beginning to go viral online. A teenager from London had posted a particularly clear recording to TikTok with the caption, "POV, you learn not to mess with the Queen's Guard." Within hours, it had received thousands of views and hundreds of comments from people around the world, expressing amazement at James's restraint and professionalism. The comments section became a fascinating mix of reactions. Former military personnel from various countries shared their own experiences and praised James's response. "This is what proper military discipline looks like," wrote a former U.S. Marine. "Measured, appropriate, and absolutely professional." A retired Canadian soldier added, "The Queen's Guard are among the best-trained ceremonial troops in the world. This video shows exactly why." International news outlets began picking up the story as the video spread across social media platforms. BBC News contacted Windsor Castle's Media Relations Department for comment, while American networks started featuring the incident in their morning shows. The story was resonating with audiences worldwide because it demonstrated something increasingly rare in viral videos: restraint, professionalism, and dignity under pressure. Back at the castle, James continued his duty shift, unaware of the growing attention his actions were receiving online. The crowd around his position had actually grown larger as word spread through the tourist groups. People were now specifically seeking him out, hoping to witness the guard who had handled the drunk tourist with such impressive skill. A group of military history students from Oxford University arrived at the castle specifically because they had heard about the incident through social media. Their professor, Dr. Elizabeth Manning, used the opportunity to explain to her students the historical significance of the Queen's Guard and the rigorous training required for such positions. "What you saw today," she told her students while observing James at his post, "represents hundreds of years of military tradition. These guards are not performers or actors. They are highly trained soldiers who happen to perform ceremonial duties. The discipline required to maintain composure while being physically assaulted, then respond with exactly the appropriate level of force, is remarkable." As James's shift neared its end, he could sense that something had changed. The atmosphere around his position felt different, more respectful somehow. People were still taking photos and videos, but they maintained a more appropriate distance and spoke in quieter tones. Word had spread not just about what had happened, but about the proper way to behave around the Queen's Guard. The incident was becoming more than just a viral video. It was turning into a teaching moment about respect, tradition, and the incredible professionalism of Britain's military personnel. James had no idea that his 30 seconds of perfect military response would soon make him famous around the world and spark conversations about duty, honor, and restraint in dozens of countries. By evening, James Mitchell's response to the drunk tourist had become a global phenomenon. The original videos had been viewed millions of times across various social media platforms, and news outlets from CNN to BBC World Service were featuring the story. The incident was being discussed on talk shows, analyzed by military experts, and praised by government officials. When James reported to the guardroom for his debrief with Captain Williams, he was surprised to find not only her waiting, but also Colonel James Peterson, the commanding officer of the Queen's Guard at Windsor Castle. This was highly unusual for a routine incident report, and James wondered if perhaps his response had been inappropriate in some way he hadn't realized. Colonel Peterson, a distinguished officer with over 25 years of service, stood as James entered the room and came to attention. "At ease, Guardsman Mitchell," he said with a slight smile. "Please have a seat. We need to discuss what happened today, but not for the reasons you might think." Captain Williams activated a tablet and showed James some of the videos that had been posted online. His eyes widened as he saw view counts in the hundreds of thousands and read comments from people around the world. "Sir, I had no idea this had gotten so much attention," he said, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden fame. "Guardsman Mitchell," Colonel Peterson began, "your response today was textbook perfect. You followed protocols exactly, used appropriate force, maintained the dignity of your position, and de-escalated a potentially serious situation without creating an international incident. The palace has been informed, and I can tell you that your conduct reflects exceptionally well on the entire Guards Division." The colonel continued, "We've been contacted by multiple media outlets requesting interviews, but our policy is to protect our personnel from unwanted publicity. However, the military leadership feels this incident provides an excellent opportunity to educate the public about the real nature of our duties and the caliber of soldiers who serve in the Queen's Guard." Captain Williams added, "The video has actually helped reduce incidents at all royal residences today. Tourists seem to be showing much more respect for the Guards, and we've had several positive interactions where visitors have thanked our personnel for their service. Your actions may have prevented dozens of future incidents." James was amazed to learn that his response was already being used as a training example at the Guards training facility. Instructors were showing the video to new recruits as a perfect demonstration of proper protocol under pressure. "This is exactly how it should be done," they were telling the trainees. "Measured, appropriate, and maintaining the dignity of the uniform at all times." The international response was equally remarkable. Military personnel from allied nations were sharing the video with comments about the professionalism of British forces. The Canadian Governor-General's Guards posted a tribute on their official social media, while the French Republican Guard acknowledged the exemplary conduct of our British colleagues. What particularly impressed military observers worldwide was James's restraint. In an age where viral videos often featured escalation and conflict, here was an example of perfect de-escalation. Military analysts noted that James had multiple opportunities to use greater force or create a more dramatic confrontation, but instead chose the minimum necessary response to resolve the situation. The story had also sparked broader conversations about respect for military personnel and traditions. Veterans organizations around the world were using the incident to discuss the importance of honoring those who serve, while tourism boards were reminding visitors about appropriate behavior at ceremonial sites. Colonel Peterson showed James a letter that had arrived from the palace that afternoon. While he couldn't share the full contents, he mentioned that James's conduct had been specifically noted by senior royal household officials. "Let's just say that your professionalism has been recognized at the highest levels," the colonel said, with obvious pride. The psychological impact on James was significant. He had joined the Queen's Guard to serve with honor and distinction, but he had never expected to become a global symbol of military professionalism. The weight of responsibility felt heavier now, knowing that millions of people had seen him represent not just his regiment, but the entire British military. Captain Williams concluded the debrief by informing James that he would receive a commendation for his conduct, which would become part of his permanent military record. "This incident will likely be studied and referenced for years to come," she said. "You've set a standard that future guards will strive to meet." As James left the guard room that evening, he reflected on how a single moment of training and discipline had resonated around the world. He had simply done what he was trained to do, following protocols that had been drilled into him during months of preparation. Yet somehow, in an age of viral videos and instant global communication, his 30 seconds of perfect military bearing had become something much larger. The drunk tourist who had pushed him would probably never realize that his moment of poor judgment had inadvertently created one of the most powerful demonstrations of military professionalism ever captured on video. James's response had shown the world what true discipline looks like and why the Queen's Guard commands such respect and admiration. 6 months after the incident, James Mitchell stood once again at his post outside Windsor Castle, but the world around him had changed dramatically. The video of his encounter with the drunk tourist had become one of the most viewed military-related videos in internet history, accumulating over 50 million views across all platforms and inspiring countless discussions about duty, respect, and professionalism. The immediate changes were visible every day. Tourist behavior at all royal residences had improved markedly, with visitors showing significantly more respect for the guards and their duties. The viral video had served as an unintentional but highly effective public education campaign about the real nature of the Queen's Guard and the proper way to interact with them during visits. James had been invited to speak at military academies around the world about discipline and restraint under pressure. His response had become a case study taught in military schools from West Point to Sandhurst, analyzed not just for its technical perfection, but for its demonstration of the values that define professional military service. The British Ministry of Defence had used the incident as the centerpiece of a recruitment campaign, showing how modern military service combines traditional values with contemporary relevance. "This is what leadership looks like," read the campaign materials, featuring still images from the viral video alongside testimonials from serving personnel. James himself had been promoted and was now serving as a training instructor, helping to prepare the next generation of Queen's Guards. He often told new recruits, "That 30 seconds taught me that every moment we're on duty, we're representing not just ourselves, but centuries of tradition and the entire British military. People around the world are watching, even when we don't realize it." The drunk tourist, whose identity was never publicly revealed, had apparently seen the video and its aftermath. Through intermediaries, he had attempted to send an apology to James, expressing genuine remorse for his behavior and gratitude that the situation hadn't escalated further. While James never responded directly, he appreciated knowing that the incident had led to personal reflection and growth for everyone involved. The broader impact on military-civilian relations was remarkable. Veterans organizations reported increased support and respect from the public, while recruitment offices noted a significant uptick in applications from young people inspired by James's example. The video had humanized military service in a way that traditional recruitment materials never could. International military leaders had also taken notice. James was invited to participate in ceremonial exchanges with allied nations, sharing training, techniques, and protocols that had produced such an exemplary response. The Queen's Guard's reputation for excellence, already strong, had been elevated to new heights on the global stage. The incident had also sparked academic interest. Researchers in fields ranging from psychology to international relations were studying the video and its impact, examining how a single moment of professional conduct could resonate so powerfully across cultural and national boundaries. Universities were using it as a teaching tool in courses on leadership, crisis management, and cross-cultural communication. Media coverage had evolved from initial reports about the incident itself to deeper examinations of military training, the role of ceremonial duties in modern armed forces, and the importance of maintaining traditions in an increasingly digital world. Documentary filmmakers had approached the Ministry of Defense about creating longer-form content, exploring the rigorous preparation required for ceremonial military roles. James's family had struggled with the sudden fame at first, but they had come to understand its positive impact. His grandfather, the former Queen's Guard who had first inspired his military career, had lived to see his grandson become a global symbol of the values he had instilled. "You've honored the uniform and the crown," he told James during a quiet family gathering. "That's all any of us can ask for." The lasting legacy of those 30 seconds continued to unfold in unexpected ways. Tourism to British royal sites had increased, with visitors specifically hoping to witness the professionalism of the Queen's Guard firsthand. International respect for British military tradition had grown, strengthening diplomatic and military relationships around the world. As James stood at his post that morning, 6 months later, he reflected on how a single moment of doing exactly what he was trained to do had created ripples that were still spreading across the globe. The drunk tourist had intended to embarrass or provoke him, but had instead provided an opportunity to demonstrate the very best of military values to millions of people worldwide. The crowd gathering around his position that morning included many of the same types of tourists as that fateful day months earlier, but now they approached with obvious respect and admiration, understanding that they were witnessing something special, a tradition of excellence that had been tested, proven, and celebrated on the world stage. James Mitchell had become more than just a Queen's Guard. He had become a symbol of what professional military service could achieve, demonstrating that true strength lies not in aggression or retaliation, but in discipline, restraint, and unwavering commitment to duty. The viral video would continue to inspire and educate for years to come, a lasting testament to the power of doing the right thing, even when no one expects to be watching.